Conference Chair and Deputy President, Professor Nigel Healy, Senior Vice President and Managing Director, Mr. Ben Sauta, invited dignitaries, respected speakers, ladies and gentlemen, Nisambula Vinaka, and a very good morning to you all from the beautiful islands of Fiji. The climate change and environmental crisis affecting our world is a harsh reality that we all are struggling to cope with as natural disasters become more intense and more frequent. COVID-19 has also brought home the realization that we are vulnerable to pandemics that can change our lives in how we live and how we work. What this means is that we need to create a society that is responsive, a society that is agile and resilient, and higher education is a key player in this. The Education for Sustainable Development 2030 roadmap, which was launched last week, clearly highlights the need for education to address the issues challenging the planet today and to develop in learners a sense of responsibility for the future sustainability of our planet. Ladies and gentlemen, Stefania Giannini, Assistant Director General for Education, UNESCO, points out, and I quote, "We are increasingly asking if what people learn today is truly relevant to their lives, if what they learn helps to ensure the survival of our planet. Education for sustainable development can provide the knowledge, awareness, and the action that empowers people to transform themselves and transform societies." Unquote. In the current pandemic situation, the higher education sector was affected in a number of ways. For students, it was a sudden move from face-to-face to remote learning and the use of significant online learning resources. For the teacher, the change from face-to-face to remote teaching, having to create online resources in a rush and ad hoc. For non-academics, the fear of job losses, providing extra support to the teaching staff. For institution, policy responses to adapt to the new education regime. In terms of infrastructure, the need particularly for IT support for online delivery. In the Pacific, for example, the inability to deliver science education due to the lack of laboratory facilities. Higher education institutions have had to rethink how they do their business, as did other education sectors. However, overall universities have seen an increase in their environment numbers in the second half of this year in many countries, mostly of local students. On a global scale, the entire education sector has been affected with COVID-19 and it has been a fast learning curve. Ladies and gentlemen, unlike COVID-19, which came upon us very suddenly and very quickly, the impacts of climate change are very gradual. And while there has been a lot of actions being taken by countries to address climate change issues, higher education institutions have not responded in any significant way to climate change action, at least not in their mainstream education. The role of the higher education sector has become even more critical now in terms of the adaptive and dynamic programs that need to be developed to not only prepare the workforce for today, but in the future. A future that is unknown and unpredictable. There are several publications that talk about the kind of graduates that we need going forward. So far, we have been talking about work-ready graduates. Today, we are talking about future-proof graduates. These are graduates who should have the ability to solve problems that are not thought to be problems today. Higher education institutions need to rethink their strategies in order to prepare programs that are transdisciplinary and involve a wider range of stakeholders, including other higher education institutions, the wider industry stakeholder spectrum, development partners, national governments, and of course our communities. Some major components of the curriculum need to include climate change adaptation, building resilience, dealing with pandemics, etc. We need programs that cut across the science, social sciences, and commercial disciplines to be more appropriate going forward. Numerous higher education institutions publish their graduate attributes and outcomes, which are quite similar relative to each other. The generic soft skills such as critical thinking, teamwork, communication, and in some cases good analytical skills are some general skills and knowledge that higher education institutions claim their graduates must have. Ladies and gentlemen, the fact that higher education institutions never publish specific content-related attributes and outcomes means that they have the flexibility to determine the content of the curriculum. The question that arises is how higher education institutions can be encouraged to adapt and remodel their curriculum, as in well as teaching and assessment methods to ensure what they teach is more suited to the kind of graduates we expect to produce going forward. This brings us to the role of national governments, industries, and the civil society in guiding curriculum development and building important skills during the course of study. The partnership between higher education institutions, national and regional governments, industries, and civil society is one that has become more critical today than ever before. Normally, higher education institutions are self-accrediting institutions and have a lot more flexibility in what and how they teach. However, more and more the requirements of registration of programs by national bodies and accrediting agencies for professional programs can be used to determine the kinds of programs that higher education institutions should deliver to produce the kinds of graduates who can contribute more meaningfully to the society as a whole in future. In light of the resilience that countries need to build to cope with climate change and other disasters, there needs to be a rethinking of curriculum, teaching and learning in the higher education sector that can prepare graduates for the needs that the world requires today. Critical and strategic thinking has now become most vital in preparing graduates who can deal with problems of the future. Research is an integral part of the higher education institutions, is more by nature conservative and academic. Globally, higher education institutions' rankings are influenced significantly by the research publication quality, which is determined by how academically sound they are. Higher education institutions are the vehicles that carry out research in areas such as disaster, risk assessment, mitigation, and reduction. Priority areas of research need to include climate science, climate modeling, traditional knowledge, particularly for us in the Pacific and other small island states, where there is a rich culture and tradition of coping with disasters, impacts of disasters and pandemics on the economy, society, trauma related to experiencing disasters and pandemics, which can all better inform government policies. There is a gap in the body of knowledge to assist countries in addressing issues of climate change to build resilience. The information available today is mostly from specific research projects being carried out in these areas, but by no means is this mainstreamed at this point in time. The whole university ranking system needs to be relooked at if higher education institutions are to focus on such research activities, because traditionally the research that occurs in higher education institutions is driven by what the ranking system determines. This is an area that needs further dialogue. In order to make the shift, it is critical that higher education institutions form new and strategic partnerships with all actors in the society. There needs to be a complete overhaul of how higher education institutions are functioning today and how they can be better aligned in terms of curriculum development and delivery. The research focus needs to be more explicitly addressing issues of climate change and pandemics. It is also important to form strategic partnerships between all stakeholders to inform curriculum development and delivery and to produce graduates who can make meaningful contributions to their countries. In conclusion, I wish to thank the Asia Pacific Professional Leaders in Education 2020 for their efforts in dealing with this very important issue of the role of higher education in addressing issues of climate change and other disasters, including pandemics. Discussions need to start somewhere, and while there are a number of scholarly articles about addressing higher education curriculum and research, higher education institutions are yet to fully embrace this critical subject. We need to do this urgently if we want to ensure that our graduates are prepared to deal with the uncertainties and unknowns in the future. Once again, thank you very much for inviting our government to give this keynote address, and I hope I have left you with some thoughts that will help in the discussions that will follow. Thank you, and God bless you all.